Leonardo da Vinci, because he wasn't a very learned person. He hadn't read a lot, or he didn't get a lot of knowledge from school, but he would often say that I'm very well read in the book of experience, because he would just watch things, observe things, and allow himself to be fascinated by the details that most people would just skip over, And because of that, he was able to see connections between vastly different realms, so that you can't categorize him. Is he a scientist or is he a painter? He didn't see himself as a painter primarily,
Welcome to the Inspirit podcast from Amoris Christi. Join us as we explore current events and all manner of fascinating topics and explore their connections to Christian living.
Hey guys, how's it going? How you been?
Hello.
Good.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Yeah, how's your week been? Anything cool you guys been up to?
Just work, enjoying cold weather.
Any more bonfires, Chris?
There's some hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate, no bonfires.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. We'll see.
Are you brewing anything good coffee-wise?
Any good coffee? I'm always brewing good coffee.
Any new?
Who would ever brew bad coffee?
Any new coffee flavors that you've been super excited about?
I actually usually drink black coffee.
Black coffee, okay. What's your brand that you go to? Folgers?
Wow. No, definitely not
Folgers.
This video is not sponsored.
Maxwell House.
No, it's even worse. I actually, just in general, I try and get coffee from more like high quality, like smaller distributors, usually from like people who source from like family farms.
Oh, nice.
There's like some Catholic coffee companies, like Catholic in the sense that they like kind of promote Catholic values, like subsidiarity, small, again, like small family farms, that kind of thing. So
here in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, the farms are not in the U.S., but the companies are. So you want good coffee, just find a good roaster, find someone who buys good quality beans, you'll be good to go.
Nice. Father, you have a favorite coffee brand that you go to?
I alternate between Pete's and Starbucks.
Oh, really?
K-cups.
Oh, wow.
K-cups.
K-cups, or even if I buy the beans, I buy one of those.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know Starbucks did good coffee beans. Well,
Yeah.
makes you think about coffee. Yeah, but I think that's one of the topic we wanted to talk about today was wonder. And wonder, awe, maybe a little different than curiosity in itself, but I think, it's something that it's part of who we are as the human person, and I think it's an integral part of who we are as a human person, and how we can understand wonder, why wonder is essential, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about that. So in your guys' life, what are some ways that maybe some beautiful experiences or some ways you've experienced wonder?
Sometimes we've experienced
Sometimes,
wonder. Yeah, I could definitely think of a few. One of the ones that immediately jumps out to my mind is just times that I've gone hiking. There was one very specific hiking trip that was big for me, which is when I solo hiked a mountain out in Colorado, Pikes Peak. That was a very big, just like personal achievement, personal victory. There's that dimension, but I still remember there were times, maybe it was because I was out of breath, but there were times where I just kind of stopped. I was like, wow, this is just incredible. Just the view. It's actually the mountain that inspired the song America the Beautiful.
Oh,
yeah, like the lyrics of that song. Oh, wow. Yeah. So that was an amazing experience. Yeah, what else? What are some other moments of wonder?
Father, any thoughts on how you experience wonder other than coffee?
At the risk of sounding weird, I experience wonder in thinking about waves, because a lot of times when we depict a wave, for example, if you draw it on a piece of paper, like a sine wave, you just draw it like that, right? But then, you could think about like a wave on a plane, like if you had a cloth or something and then you go like this and you could see the waves going out. But if you think about, let's say, a particle of water, and if it's like shaking, and you think about the way in which waves propagate in every direction, and then all kinds of superimpositions of the waves, sometimes I'm just amazed by that. And that's just at the level of physical material.
Yeah.
But then you think about electromagnetic waves. Whew, it's just
All
beyond.
the world, right?
Yeah, so everything you do, like if you just lift up your hand right now, because you have electrons in your hand, and they accelerate, it creates electromagnetic waves. They're very low wavelength, so you can't see them. But those waves propagate to the ends of the universe. And so
everything you do.
It's just beautiful. So sometimes I get lost in the wonder of that. And I think that it's a helpful kind of exercise in wonder, because there's absolutely no way you can wrap your mind around it. You can just, okay, I've got it all now. I get it. And I think that's part of the characteristic of wonder, is that you can't quite seize it. If you try to seize it, it ceases to be wonder at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And I also think like a lot of times about the human body, and just like in 2025, we're still discovering new things about, how the human body works. So this year's Nobel Prize in medicine was like on how T cells works, the immune function. And so there's a specific part of T cells, that way it works. And it's just fascinating to me that, we're in 2025, we're still discovering things about our human body. And, I've always found it like
more unknown than known.
Yeah. Right.
To say?
Yeah. So I've just always found it amazing. So yeah, like you're saying, Father, I think there's a sense of like, you can't seize it. And so, you can't control it. And even with the human body, I think it's like, when you think you know everything, we can, continue to discover something new. So why do you guys think like wonder is so important for the human person? For us as human persons,
We're wondering.
Well, because many things in the created world exist to be used, as a means to something. And utility, basically, right? And but we as human beings are the only thing within the visible creation that's not made as a means. We are ends in ourselves, each human person. And sorry, I'm just thinking right now. I might have misspoke earlier. What did I say? Did I say was it's too low of a frequency is what I meant to say. I don't know if I said wavelength. Sorry, that was just lingering in my mind.
The electromagnetic waves.
Yeah. Anyway,
still wondering about it.
I guess I am. Yeah. Too low of a frequency to be seen. But anyway, as human beings, we're ends in ourselves, and when you exercise wonder, you're actually you're respecting that dignity that we have as human beings, because there isn't any point. For example, when I sit there thinking about that, and I'm continuing to reflect on this beauty of these waves, there's not really any purpose to it. There's no material benefit that I can provide by sitting here and doing that. So why am I doing it? Am I not wasting time?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, but see, when you're the end, you can waste time in a sense, because you're the end. It's like time exists for you. You're not actually existing in time for the sake of something else. But with anything else, it wouldn't be the case. Like if you have a computer, you wouldn't want to waste processing time, because you're consuming energy, and that computer exists to accomplish something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons why fostering wonder is so important for us as human beings.
Yeah. Wow.
There's something in wonder that is so integral to being human. And one of the ways that's actually very apparent to me is when I think of a person who doesn't have it. Like, I suppose somebody who doesn't really seem particularly impressed by anything. Or just like, whether it's kind of a careless attitude or just kind of like blasé, like whatever it might be, ennui, or all these other fancy French emotions. Like just somebody who, I don't know, just looks at life and just like, or like, yeah, I don't know. It's
like
not that
Albert
impressive.
Camus. No.
Is that what you say, Camus?
No, I just thought of it because you said French. But
Yeah. There's something in wonder, like when we wonder at something, when something fills us with awe, 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 it's like something that's just like, wow. Sort of thinking of like Owen Wilson. He goes, wow, the actor. But yeah, we're like, wow, this is amazing. Like suddenly we become aware of the impactfulness, the depth, the inner sort of value and meaning of something or someone. And yeah, to not have that would feel like a very deprived human experience.
Yeah.
It would become very cold, very rote, mechanical, maybe efficient, but not a particularly interesting life.
Yeah. I think the highest things in human life tend to be similar in these respects. Like the similar things could be said about love, right? When you're in love and you're spending time with people that you love, or you're just lost in the beauty and goodness of love, there isn't really a purpose. There isn't really anything that's achieved through that or something like that. And it's also, by the way, not measurable. You can't really measure like how much progress a person has made in love or anything like that. So all of those things are similar in wonder as well. So I think it really just taps into our highest faculties, our spiritual faculties, the ways in which we transcend the causality of this material universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in the history of philosophy, Western philosophy, in the modern period, like especially around the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment, there was this intense focus on reason, to the point that in some cases it became this hyper rationality. Like everything had to be rationally explained and rationally understood. And that pendulum kind of swung in the opposite direction in what would have been the 19th century with like German Romanticism, which then became all about experience and emotion, which also is beautiful, but can also go too far in the other direction. One of the places where the philosophy and the history of philosophy landed after that, in the 20th century especially, was the rise of phenomenology, like Edmund Husserl being one of the early pioneers of it, and his idea of bracketing, where you just take a thing as such. You like almost like in his mind putting brackets around this thing or this concept, whatever it might be, and just kind of looking at it as it is. And he was very interested in this idea of coming back to a sense of wonderment. That was something that was first brought up in the history of philosophy in Aristotle, or probably was older than Aristotle, but he talks about it a lot. And he mentions how wonder is very important in philosophy. But, it's funny how this is something that philosophers seem to go up and down and struggle with for a while, but it's so intuitive to the human experience. And I think that was what phenomenology was trying to bring out, is like, hey, this is not something that you have to be like an armchair thinker to become aware of or come to terms with. Like, this is just a natural part of our human experience. We should actually pay attention to it. Like, so yeah, he invented all this technical process around it, but yeah, the idea of just being able to like see things and receive them as such without putting too much interpretation on it, without letting our biases run interference on it, but we experience reality as reality.
Yeah. And yet there's some work to do to get there sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It's like an undoing, I guess, the way you were describing
quieting down.
Yeah, quieting down, letting the raw speak to you again. Like it's something has to clear its way. And also like going to the phenomenological perspective, you do have to allow the natural attitude to be shaken up by the experience of wonder. Because like for example, you're living out your daily routine, you've got chores to do, tasks to do, you've got to take the kids to school. And in the midst of all that, like wonder doesn't shine through, and not because any of those things are wrong or bad, but that's just the way it is. Like when you're when you're in the pragmatic mode, it's just, I think that wonder doesn't tend to shine through.
Yeah, life can almost become very beige.
Yeah. I mean, and that's also an important part of life. Like, these different perspectives on life are all important. I think that there's one angle into the mystery of life, which is sort of like you're a person on an adventure. I'm navigating through these difficult circumstances and terrains in order to attain some good. And that's also important. But wonder is like a different angle into the mystery of life, where you're just seized by beauty. You're kind of taken up into certain higher realities where there's nothing to do, actually. There's nothing to do, and you're just savoring. If anything, you're just receiving there.
And I think it's the beauty of the journey too, like as you're walking on this journey, in a way you're experiencing these moments of wonder. But like you said, you have to maybe just pause,
you have to cultivate it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in some ways, like regardless of one's socioeconomic status, if the circumstances of life have arranged themselves, let's say, in such a way that you're always behind, you're always having to work just to provide or whatever, it can be hard to cultivate wonder.
It can be. It can be, and yet wonder is still possible.
Yes.
That's, you mentioned a natural attitude, and it's interesting that you would use the word attitude, because ordinariness is not antithetical to wonder.
Sure.
And I know, Anthony, you mentioned how ordinary life can actually provide a lot of beautiful experiences of wonder. And I'd love to hear some examples from you. But yeah, there's this idea that, when we're too wedded to the idea of adventure, when it goes too far, like ordinary life, all of a sudden, like our expectations sort of break away, and we feel like, I can't find it or experience wonder in daily life, but we can. So, when I mentioned how ordinary life can become beige, it's more that idea of slipping into an attitude where it's just like, there's nothing new here. Yeah. There's nothing to see here. Yeah. But actually,
go for it.
No, I was going to say, like, Anthony, like I'm sure you've encountered how, like, in that ordinary living, there's plenty.
Yeah, no, I think wonder it is, you can experience in ordinary life. I do think there is an attitude that makes us prone to wonder. And I think when I think of it, it's like you're allowing something from the outside to move ourselves, like you guys were talking about. So I do think there's an attitude of like humility that is involved, like saying like, we can't grasp us, let it seize us, let it wow us. That person who can say wow, I think it's a thing of like humility or pride, that he can't allow something from the outside to make him move, is what I think it is. Yeah. But I've seen wonder, especially in suffering, and I've seen like when you see people suffer in certain ways, or their attitude towards suffering and how they go about suffering, it kind of makes you wonder, like or even just regular suffering, like why does this child have to go through this? And there's a sense of wonder that starts coming with it, that's more than just curiosity. It's like starting to make you think, how do I make sense of this? What is going on here? Right. And there's a sense of like that child moves you. What's going on with that child allows you to move. So yeah, I do think there's a sense of experiencing wonder in ordinary life too.
Yeah, there can be something very sacred in suffering. And so, encountering it and having a sense of reverence toward it, it can definitely lead to awe. And just on the topic of reverence, to use that word, I'm a big fan of Dietrich von Hildebrand. And
we know.
Really? Is that obvious?
Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand.
Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand, yes. No, one of my favorite books is The Art of Living, which contains essays that actually both of them wrote, but Dietrich wrote most of them, but Alice's essays were longer. Anyway, it's basically a series of essays on some virtues that they consider essential for living, and one of the first ones that Dietrich mentions, and Hildebrand mentions this frequently in his works, is reverence, which is very closely linked with the idea of piety for him. But piety can also be a very, sometimes it's used in a narrow sense of like a religious thing. So, reverence, he's kind of broadening the scope a little bit, that the reverent person like receives other people with wonder and understands that they're gifts. And wonder and reverence, I think they kind of go hand in hand here. There's something that's a little bit more at the level of being, I think, when we talk about reverence, but they're very closely linked. This wonderment, this reverence, and it's especially evident when we wonder at people. Wonder, we're brought to wonder and awe about people. There's stories that people would tell of John Paul II, how he would talk to them like he was like they were the only one in the room. Yeah, they would have that sense that like he reverenced them. I think that's very closely linked there.
Yeah, and I think we've all met in different stages in our life people like that who've just made us, be in awe and wonder. What do you guys think stands in the way of allowing us to cultivate wonder?
Yeah, well, earlier I was talking about there's different modes into life, right? And one is when you're on the task or you're on the adventure or whatever, which has its own goodness, but is perhaps not most conducive to wonder. And then there's the other mode into life, which is more like contemplative in nature, I guess you could say. If you think about that from a neurological perspective or just like a physiological perspective, when you are facing stress or any kind of obstacle, threat, something that you need to overcome, it's all of the things that happen to you work in the opposite direction of wonder, right? So, like even your physical vision narrows. Like when you think of wonder, you're thinking of like an open scene that you're beholding.
Right. Yeah. Versus and here, tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision. Yeah. Physically, you get tunnel vision, but you also mentally get tunnel vision. You can only focus on that one thing that you need to solve, which is a great thing. That's how God made us, so that in specific circumstances and situations, we can focus our energy there and all that stuff. And then, of course, even things like, you get your elevated heart rate and all that stuff. So you're not truly like at rest. You're working. Yeah. Even if you're just sitting there, you're working. If you're nervous about something, you're working. Your body's working. And so I think that just if there's a constant state of that kind of stress, or where you're in some version of fight or flight or whatever, that can make it difficult to enter into wonder. Because you're not, when you're facing a threat, if you take the simplest example of, okay, there's like some tiger or something in front of me, I'm not going to be sitting there and wonder about the waves, propagating throughout the universe, because I'll get killed. So God designed me in such a way that I cannot, even if I try to, I'm like, try to wonder. It's not going to work. My system won't let me. So I think in order to overcome that obstacle, we have to take time in our day to actually enter into that other mode of being. To do that, you have to trust in God a little bit, because if you're still worried, like, but what about tomorrow? What about my finances? What about my family? Then even when you sit down, you won't be able to let yourself, But if you can entrust it to God, like, I know He's taking care of me. And in this moment right now, I can just breathe, and I could just relax, and I could slow down my heart rate and my breathing and widen my vision, and then enter into wonder, to actually to honor the dignity that I have as image of God.
Yeah, gratitude helps a lot with that, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, gratitude to God. Like, and actually I think practicing gratitude in, in the spiritual sense of it, like learning to be grateful to God, I think actually does help significantly in cultivating wonder. Because if you truly embrace gratitude and God's providence, like, you'll always find more things to be thankful for. Like, wow, this day was amazing. Thank you, God. But
again, I think it's about, like you're saying, it's like it's allowing something from the outside to, move you, or like in a way you're saying, oh, I'm looking to God now. for something beautiful that happened to me.
Yeah.
So we talked about it a little bit with Father Jose on the vocation of transcendence. In a way, I think wonder and awe is what that vocation of transcendence is pulling us towards. It's like allowing us to go towards that transcendence in a way. So
definitely. But you know who I think does wonder better than anybody is children.
Yeah.
Because children are amazed by everything.
Children are amazed by everything. I also think with children that they need wonder and imagination, because many times they're not able to rationalize or make sense of the world. So they, in a way,
everything's new.
Yeah. So they kind of use wonder and imagination, because I think we talked about a little bit, right? Like, they don't have connections with their prefrontal cortex yet. So that reasoning is not yet developed. So then in a way, it's their brain allowing you to say, okay, this is how I make sense of the world.
Be a little more raw, a little more direct. And the wide open possibility and lack of sort of internal blockages. All those neurons firing for sure. Yeah. I once heard somebody describe, like, why do we all just sort of like just get so happy when we see a baby? Like, it's a very ordinary human experience. It might be a little odd if you don't feel happy seeing a newborn baby, but typically that's most people's experience. Yeah. And
some big, like, tough guy who's very difficult to work with all of a sudden start making baby sounds and stuff.
It's like, oh, he's the cutest thing. Or like, he breaks down in tears, even like these people that will, they'll say like, I never cry, but that, like that kind of thing, right? Why does that happen? And, I've heard different explanations, but one that I heard is, when we see a baby, when we see a child, something naturally in us is just like just suddenly recognizes like, man, like, it's like new life. It's just full of possibility, like wide open horizons. Like, on the spiritual level, it's like we see the innocence of a child, like we see the innocence of a newborn baby.
Beauty.
Yeah. And the purity of it, right? Like, but then in that kind of more developmental way, it's like, this child's possibilities are just wide open. And so like, it literally, like, we see the wide open horizons before that baby, and it reminds us of the wide open horizons that actually is really before all of us. So I thought that was a really cool explanation. I think obviously there's more to it. Babies are also really cute, but I think that is like
it's beauty, I guess,
part of it. Yeah. And the fact that it can even circumvent our ways of rationalizing our experiences, so that we start making goo goo gaga sounds. And there's something very innate there, something very intuitive there that just kind of gets stirred up.
You guys have any thoughts on how our Christian faith kind of evokes wonder, or how wonder evokes the Christian faith? Like, both questions? Or, I mean, I often think about the incarnation and this, like, it's like you can wonder about that, and that how that evokes wonder for all of us, Christ coming into the world, Word made flesh, and, like, I guess books have been written on it, and, but yeah, I think that evokes wonder. But, how does wonder help in our journey of faith?
Well, I mean, even that's a great example, what you just stated there, because Christian faith gives us the ability and the privilege to be able to hold on to truth with certainty that we can't understand. And in that's sort of like your ideal setup for wonder. Because when you don't understand something, there's a temptation to skepticism, cynicism about reality. And you see that a lot with the philosophers, because they realize that ultimately the world is incomprehensible or something like that. And it's a kind of like an intellectual despair.
Yeah.
But with faith, we're very comfortable with the idea that, no, this is true. And we're certain it's true. And we have barely any idea of what it means.
Yeah.
We have we just like the Trinity or something, it's like, we just like scratch at the surface of it, and it's like, but we can keep scratching because we've been given through faith a certain knowledge that it's real and that it's true.
And it's actually that fact that we're just barely scratching the surface that opens the doors wide to that wonder. Because mystery in the Christian sense of the word is not like a Scooby-Doo mystery where it's something that's locked and needs to be somehow figured out and solved. And mystery is also not something that is meant to be like a source of despair where it's something that we just can't understand. Like, yeah, I kind of detest when people will use it in that way of just like, it's the Trinity, it's a mystery, we can't understand it. That's not exactly how we mean it. It's more what you mentioned, Father, how it's something that's so profound that it just can never be exhausted. So we can understand it. We just can't fully understand it, and we will never fully understand it. But that's actually not cause for discouragement, but actually for wonder. Like, wow, there will always be more. Like, God is infinitely interesting.
Yes, and there's a role for faith, not only in the theological mysteries, but even in our relationship to the physical world. For example, like when you were talking about the body and saying how there's so much unknown to it, right? Or you can think about anything in this world, anything really. And it's always, in some sense, more unknown than it is known. But because of our faith in God and our faith in Him as Creator and having provided this world for us, there's like this there's this fraternal relationship with all of creation that we have. So we trust it. You know, we're not living, again, we're not falling into despair or skepticism even about the material universe. But we're like, to the extent that it's beyond my reach, it's all the more amazing. The majesty of God revealed all the more by its unknownness, you know, and by its mystery.
Yeah. I'm kind of the mind that if you end up thinking and intellectually journeying far enough, you'll eventually reach a point where you'll either reach the conclusion that either everything has meaning or nothing does. And from an existentialist perspective, like what I think of is Jean-Paul Sartre, who is an atheist existentialist. And he has this famous story he tells about the tree. There's a tree stump. I'm a little vague on it, but anyway, it was a tree. And he just was suddenly taken by the fact that the tree existed, but it didn't lead him to wonder. It actually led him to this like revulsion inside. He was kind of left before like the bare, like just sheer raw being of the tree, and he had this feeling of like revulsion and disgust. And
tells you more about him than the tree.
It does, because what he calls that is existential dread. That being is this ugly thing. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of his famous quotes is that hell is the other.
Is that him or Camus? I forget. But
Sartre.
Sartre.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, there's this idea that actually, like existence, being, life, everything has meaning. That everything that I know Father John Horn, who we all know and love, loves the story of how St. Ignatius of Loyola, near the end of his life, would just, kind of fall into contemplative ecstasy, just contemplating like a blade of grass, because he just, like something so minute, just opened to him the wonder of like God's goodness. Yeah. How opposite that is to the idea of existential dread.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you make, because I think our response to wonder is kind of can be one of this too. Like, I think that too is important in cultivating an attitude of wonder, of like, there are moments that do lead us to wonder in everyday life, but sometimes our response can be either like despair, like you're saying, oh, what's the point of me even just wondering about this or thinking about this? Or is there any point? Because oftentimes it feels like, you're just wasting time with it. But I do think like, when you look at the scientific world, like not everything, but many of the times discoveries are being initiated by someone's wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, like, okay, this child has this disease. how does this disease happen? And then that leads to the development of a vaccine, you know? So, and, you know, I meant like, yeah, there's so many people who like thought about this since they're like teenage years and led them to the discovery of the vaccine. And so, yeah, it's just amazing. You know, in a way, there is a wasting time aspect to wonder, but it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't lead to progress too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the, you know, coming back to that existential dread thing we mentioned, if that continues to grow and grow and grow, so that it goes beyond an attitude even in one person's life, but it permeates into a group or a society, you see the destructive effects of that over time, how like it's a very suppressed human experience.
Even suicidal.
Yeah. And, you know, John Paul II, you know, who we mentioned him earlier, you know, he was very keen on that. He was very aware of that, I think, because a lot of times in his sermons, his homilies, his writings, you know, he speaks, of course, about opening wide the doors to Christ, you know, opening that horizon wide. But, you know, he also was very in touch with the human spirit. And he had that sense that, like, you know, people have to be, like, animated out of this rut, this sense that, like, life is wearisome, that life is dull, that life is boring. And, you know, of course, we saw the effects of that politically, socially. Like, you know, I mean, those were huge across his time as Pope. You know, the fall of communism in Poland and so many other things. So yeah, that dread can like creep into a society, and I think we see it a lot today. You know, I think we see a lot of instances where, you know, people, there's ordinary discouragement, and life has its ups and downs. There's ruts that we all experience. It's like a wave. This is just, but then there's something that sort of moves past that a little bit, where a person really struggles to find enjoyment in life, and that sense of wonder almost can feel lost. And people who are in that place, like I can think of people like they'll almost weep over the sense of like lost innocence, like kind of like how we say, like, you know, the innocence of children who wonder at everything. Like they'll recall that. People who are in that place recall that, and they're like, I wasn't always this way. You know, life used to be so much brighter, and it feels so dull, so beige. So, you know, I think it's also important to be aware that that's a capacity within all of us. You know, hopefully we would never come to that place. Yeah. But, you know, if we find ourselves there, how do we bring ourselves out of that? Like, because, you know, I think it touches the question of faith, but even just on our day-to-day experience, how do we bring ourselves out of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it's just a bad point that you'll find yourself in, and that though that's true too. But my point is to say, virtually, I think anyone at reaching adult stage of life would because of the baggage of life experiences and hurts and all of that, need a process of like healing and restoration, regeneration. Which is where I think partly what the whole biblical idea of becoming childlike comes from, you know, unless you turn and become like children, you cannot enter the kingdom of God, you know,
right.
And because we need to actually turn and become like children. Like there's a process of conversion and healing where you might be more of a child at 30 than you were at 25 because of the work of grace, you know, that's happening inside of you, you know. But I want to touch back to something you said, Anthony, on how wonder plays a role in the discovery of so many things, right? Which is actually kind of funny because the whole point of what we were saying about wonder is that it doesn't really have a practical object. You know, it's not for the sake of X that I'm
to get a task done or a project or something.
Exactly, you know, and it's sort of timeless and all of that stuff. And yet it produces very practical fruits, though. So that they're both held together, you know, and it's kind of like how we say, you know, in the spiritual life that our actions should flow from a contemplative interior. Like your prayer life is not for the sake of so that I can do all this ministry or do whatever, and yet it flows as the fruits of that. And I think in science is a great place where both of these things have to be held in the right relationship and balance, right? Because, for example, a person could be spending all day in wonder, but if they don't also they also need the discipline, in other words, to then take those inspirations and work them out so that they produce the whatever, the practical benefit that one may intend. And I mean, I experience that in just my own work and stuff like that too, where I can lean, either too much in one direction, or like maybe you get an inspiration and it's very moving, and then you're like, okay, now it's time to work on this, and it's good. But then sometimes you can work on it so much that you kind of choke the life out of it. You're trying to produce something from it, and then you feel called back into like take a step back and wonder.
Yeah.
There's a kind of like back and forth. And I think science is a great example of that because, technically in science, all you're doing is falsification. Here's a hypothesis. Let me see if I can prove it wrong. If I can't prove it wrong, there's a good probability that it's true. That's technically what the scientific method is, which is not really how people do things, right? Because that's the methodological part. That's the discipline part of science. But the other part that we don't speak that much about is where you're just lost in wonder. And then you're like fascinated by something, and then you're curious about it. You're intrigued by it. You might have some hypothesis about it, some intuition about it, which comes from nowhere.
Yeah.
In a sense, though it's the Holy Spirit, working among us, as the Second Vatican Council teaches. But it comes up from nowhere. And then you're like, okay, now let me subject this to some rigor and some, methodological process of like systematic process of falsification and all of that,
Yeah, and I think that wonder is also many times, I think, also the driver for perseverance too in your method too, because
that's true.
Because like you're constantly trying to, answer the question that made you wonder, and you're like you keep going at it till you get an answer. So I think, you need that wonder for perseverance in your going about your daily life too, or the center. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, wonder also orients our vision towards understanding, like in technical terms, towards first principles. Like the
first principles meaning?
Yeah, so the difference between knowledge and understanding and wisdom is knowledge is sort of you have data about a thing. Understanding is you actually understand you actually see the way that the points of data interconnect with each other. That's called you see the principles of things. So understanding concerns principles, knowledge concerns facts. Wisdom concerns first principles, which is where you look at how the principles in different areas all connect to each other. So that's a very Thomistic definition, but wonder orients us towards first principles because our vision moves in that direction. Because I'll give an example from my own life. I love language. I love language learning. I love culture.
How many languages, Chris? Are we at this point?
It doesn't matter. I wonder, but where does that interest come from? Like in my life, in my personal experience in my life, there was always a background interest, and I might say if I'm telling the narrative of my life, maybe it was the Lord planting seeds along the way, but there was a definitive experience that was a turning point, and it was when I was 18. I was at a conference. There was a cardinal speaking, and I remember him being at a pulpit or something. And he kind of was like banging on the pulpit a little bit. And he was saying like, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. And he said it over and over and over throughout. And, I hadn't had an experience like this at this point in my life, but it literally felt like there was like something pounding on my heart, like a drum, where I just was like, there was this feeling inside of like, I have to communicate like the love of Jesus to people. Like there's something very deep inside that was stirred by that. So it was evangelistic, but also it was, the understanding that language is the means by which we communicate truth to each other, that we understand one another. So all that concerns like wisdom and first principles, right? It's like seeing what underlies it. So when I look at, let's say like grammar tables and I go, wow, that's so cool. obviously that's not everyone's experience, but for me, in my mind, it's because of the wonderment of what's behind this. This enables me to communicate better with people. So I'm looking past the data points towards the principles. And that's something that wonder always does to us, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great point. So what would you guys say to like what helps what helps cultivate wonder? Because I bring up the point also because just in the context of social media, and I've noticed, for me at least, like these shorts or YouTube videos, or even, I don't know, videos maybe, but they really, movies for sure they do, but I think there's a storytelling to movies, but they don't really cultivate wonder. But for me, reading does. But I think part of why reading allows me to cultivate wonder is because it allows me to engage with the text, and there's a moment where I can just, I guess you could pause videos too, but you can pause it and engage it. But
do you think shorts and videos don't, but movies and books do for you?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's more art that's tied to those forms that you're mentioning, but I mean, having been on the other side of it, of having made shorts and videos, I think that it's really a question of the motives behind it, like behind its creation. So like, I'll give you an example. Like, there are people out there who will just make funny 30-second videos. And, you know, they're not doing anything harmful by like making those videos, right?
Cat videos.
Cat videos, sure. Like taking a video of their cat and it gets like 1 million views online or something like that. Nothing wrong with that per se. But the issue is when it becomes a point of consumption, where now it's something that it's like you're not really engaging it or like being led to go like, wow, it's really, you're just kind of gobbling it up like junk food.
Yeah, so it might not be about the video itself then, right, is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, that was something that was always
fair.
Like I found myself struggling and pushing against, was it's like wanting to provide something of value. Like when I would make videos, when I would make these short form videos, like it would need to be something that somehow, like again, bearing in mind that like wonder can move us towards the higher and deeper things, those principles we're talking about. You know, how do I kind of get people to look beyond, kind of look deeper, like look towards something more authentic? And part of that is not treating, I think, is treating truth and beauty like commodities, which is very easy on social media, where everything's about content creation. You know, you're just generating content. It's stuff. It's not really looking at the inner beauty and depth of things. So intention definitely plays a role. But yeah, it's also like from the recipient side, to your earlier point, like, you know, is this me just engorging myself on stuff?
Yeah.
Or is it me really engaging with something on a more artistic level? Not that you have to be like an auteur, like, you know, be pretentious about it, but like, you know, is there room for me to go into something deeper here? Like, does this have depth to it? Is this drawing me into something that's deeper and worthwhile, that has value? But yeah, we were talking about ways that we cultivate wonder. And I might have diverted us a little bit, but
all good. Any thoughts, Father, on what cultivates wonder for you personally, or what you would share with another person about helping them cultivate wonder?
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, I would agree with what you said about, I mean, I do think movies, books, music.
Music's a big one, yeah.
Helps. But again, all of these things can be taken in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, they can just become, it's sort of like, are you just skipping across the surface, or are you actually entering into it, whatever it is, right? Now that, like as Chris said, it requires that the content itself is
has the ability to actually take you to something deep.
yeah. There's something to go into there in the first place. But even if it's something very deep, like one of the dangers of reading for those who are avid readers is too much consumption makes for a lazy mind, you know? And so you can get into a mode of like, oh, I'm learning about this and I'm learning about this and I'm learning about this, but you're never really entering deeply into any of it. You know, you don't really have the time, you don't make the time for that.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons, like, I'm somewhat intrigued by Leonardo da Vinci, because he wasn't a very learned person. You know, he hadn't read a lot, or he didn't get a lot of knowledge from school, but he would often say that I'm very well read in the book of experience, because he would just watch things, observe things, and allow himself to be fascinated by the details that most people would just skip over, you know. And because of that, he was able to see connections between vastly different realms, so that you can't categorize him. Is he a scientist, or is he a painter? He didn't see himself as a painter primarily, you know. Like going to Chris's point about how wonder takes you to those principles, I could see that in somebody like him, because he's studying the human heart, and he's the basically observing the fluid flow and the eddies and stuff like that, and the role that plays in the heart, and then seeing that in water, and seeing that in curls of people's hair. And so, you know, he's kind of like going behind the things to see points of unification. And so that, I just give that as an example of where it's probably better to let yourself be inspired by something, but then you probably have to spend enough time in your own contemplative journey in order for wonder to genuinely be cultivated.
You have to stay with it a little bit. Like mentioning movies, I don't know if you've ever seen, it's kind of an 80s classic, Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. So like the famous line that he says in the movie, and it's the last line in the movie too, when he goes, life comes at you pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you might miss it. Obviously it's played a bit for laughs in the movie. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but there's truth to it. It's there, you know, life can just pass you by, and every once in a while you have to kind of pause and look around at, like, you know, where am I? Like, what am I seeing right now? What am I experiencing right now? Drawing example, so it's kind of a funny thing if you look at history. The Greeks produced a lot more philosophers per capita, I'll say, than the Romans did. I don't know if you've noticed that. There are Roman philosophers, but a lot of them also emulated or built their work off of Greeks. And the Romans were known for being extremely pragmatic and efficient. In fact, they were also known for being very blunt and to the point. And so when the Romans expanded the empire into the eastern part of the Mediterranean, into the Greek world, that often caused a lot of conflict and misunderstanding, because the Greek and Greekified Hellenized peoples, they're like, these Romans are so rude. They're so blunt. Like, they just sort of get to the point all the time. And the Romans couldn't understand why they would all talk so much. But you know, the Romans didn't produce a lot of philosophers, and part of that was because there was such a dominant force of pragmatism in their culture, which led them to do these great building works, like roadworks, aqueducts, just the military arm of Rome, all these things, right? But there was something lost in that also, where Romans didn't really contemplate the universe in that sort of way that Greek, especially Athenian Greek culture did, because there is an even more pragmatic group than the Romans, which was the Spartans, who hardly ever did anything that wasn't pragmatic. Anyway, drawing these examples from history, it also tells us something as a society. American culture has been prized by many people for its pragmatism. So I think that in our own culture, we have a bit of a predilection towards efficiency, which is good for a lot of things, but it can go against wonder. Maybe that's also why people are so fascinated by it today.
I think what Father was we were talking about, we need to have both, the wonder kind of driving the pragmatism, and the pragmatism always leading back to wonder. And so
and America also has the side of innovation
and vision,
so there's that creative spark as well, but but I agree with you. And I think thanks for taking us through the history. That's fascinating, and I'm always amazed at how pretty much after that Greek period that you're talking about, let's say after 300 BC or so, you don't really find any major discoveries, insights into the universe, into the human body, until like the Renaissance.
Yeah.
You would think like, oh, there's a steady progress of discoveries and insights. There's really not. I mean, the ancient Greeks, they were able to figure out and estimate the circumference of the earth. Meanwhile, like most people after that are still thinking the earth is flat, but they've already calculated the circumference of the earth, and you already got people. Actually, it's interesting. I think it's, the guy behind the Hippocratic Oath. What is it? Hippocrates?
Hippocrates.
Hippocrates, I didn't want to mispronounce his name, but Hippocrates, he actually, speculated that the brain is the real center of the human being, not the heart, which is what most people, tended to believe. Even for centuries after that, people thought it was the heart, but he speculated that it was the brain. And he believed that therefore illnesses of the brain are the most difficult. And he thought that epilepsy was an illness of the brain. And it wasn't a spiritual malady. And so you think about that. This is in 300 BC, 400 BC. But then without a space or a culture that fosters wonder, you'll just get the pragmatism.
Yeah.
Okay, conquest, buildings, business and all that kind of stuff. And you can literally go for 1,000 years without making any real progress,
It was about how long the Roman Rome lasted,
which is wild, right? Because you assume that history is like steady progress, but it's not.
Well,
if we don't cultivate, if we don't create a space for wonder, we could go 1,000 years just being relatively stagnant.
Yeah, in a way, we need a society that cultivates wonder, right? So
I was kind of laughing when you mentioned the example of the heart and the brain in Hippocrates, because it wasn't until the late Middle Ages, it might have even been in the early modern period, that the question was finally settled about which organ was really more important in the body, the heart or the liver. So
the liver was another contestant.
In fact, it wasn't until a few centuries ago that we thought that the liver produced blood in the body, which it doesn't. It's bones, it's bone marrow, Anyway, you're the doctor, Anthony. But and also the liver, because the liver is the largest internal organ, it's the heaviest. And so even this question was, we kind of take for granted how contested this question was in medieval medicine, because it even went into religious conversation. If you look at depictions of Jesus' crucifixion, sometimes he is pierced from one side and sometimes he's pierced from the other side. And it's because they hadn't settled the question of whether when the soldier pierced him with the lance, it was piercing his heart or his liver.
No way.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It was not a settled question. And so some artists thought that the blood and water coming out was coming from his liver.
Wow.
But then finally the question was settled, no, it's the heart. If the heart stops, you die. If the liver stops, you might.
You'll be fine.
You get a liver transplant.
You'll be fine.
And the liver is an amazing organ, of course. But, it was only a little after that question was settled historically that actually, you begin to see a huge surge in religious interest around the heart of Jesus, which was older than this, debate being settled. But it really kind of came forth in a dramatic way afterward, when it was much more clear to people that the heart is actually the most essential organ.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's crazy. It made me wonder about,
about
Christ
the
and the
liver.
resurrection. I never really thought about that until you mentioned about the whole spirit thing. Any just last words for a young person to, why you should cultivate wonder and what you can do to help cultivate wonder in your day-to-day life?
Well, my advice for young people who are at that juncture in life where they get to set the trajectory for where they're going professionally and otherwise is to consider the significance of wonder in those key decisions.
Wow.
Because the temptation will be, I will have the best possible life if I have the profession that pays the most. Okay, which is not, I'm not just outright opposed to that.
We've heard you talk about money.
Have you?
In previous episodes.
Yeah. Well, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, it's okay. It makes sense, right? There is some truth to that. Of course, you have a lot of access through money. But if you have to do something every single day for the rest of your life that is merely a means to an end, it's merely something pragmatic. Okay, I need to do this in order to pay for my family. I mean, gosh, is that how you want to live life? I mean, hopefully you can choose something where there's at least a possibility for you personally, like with the way your heart is and what you're drawn to, there's at least a possibility of fostering a sense of wonder increasingly through life. And I'm not saying that wonder comes cheap, that you'll be able to live in that reality on day one or something like that. But like, for example, if you're genuinely drawn by the wonder of the human body or something like that, like you are, Anthony, and then, yeah, okay, it's a lot of hard work. You're not going to experience wonder every single day when you're studying for your exams and all that stuff, but you know that it's gradually coming about, And so I would just hope that for young people who have that ability to make those choices right now, that this is at least factored in.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. I suppose my final thought would just be, don't settle or resign yourself to that beige, gray existence that we mentioned. And take a little time to consider, like, pause and look around. Like, have I reached that place? Have I lost a little bit of my sense of wonder? A little bit of self-reflection can help a lot in just identifying, like, maybe I need to come back to that a little bit. And how do I cultivate wonder? I mean, there's 1,000,001 ways you can do it, but really, I think a lot of it comes down to cultivating your humanity and whatever that might look like for you, whatever interests you. I mean, that's every person's journey.
Yeah.
But I think there are good places to start. So, but just don't settle for that passive and very monotone, literally monotonous existence.
Yeah. And I'd just say, just adding to that, not to underestimate the value of wonder, and how that can lead, where it leads you, what it can lead you to. And, maybe looking at the stars is not like immediately going to lead you to somewhere, but we had Brother Guy on here, and now looking at the stars in the middle of Kenya led him to be the director of Vatican Observatory. So not to underestimate the value of wonder in our lives. So yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. It was a beautiful episode, and hope it helps our audience too. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inspirit podcast. Inspirit is an initiative of Amoris Christi, an apostolate dedicated to lay spiritual formation. For more information and to keep up to date, you can visit our website at amorischristi.org and follow us on social media.